The misunderstanding. Olivia Hartley's Louboutin heels clicked rhythmically against the cobblestone driveway as she approached the towering wrought iron gates of Evergreen Manor. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculately manicured lawn, highlighting the mansion's imposing Georgian facade. Olivia paused, fishing her phone from her Hermes handbag to snap a quick photo. This would be perfect for the event's social media campaign. As chair of the Hartley Foundation's annual charity gala, Olivia had spent months scouting the perfect venue. Evergreen Manor, with its rich history and sprawling grounds, promised to deliver the air of exclusivity her high society guests craved. Now, just 2 weeks before the big night, she was here for a final walkthrough to ensure every detail was impeccable. Olivia pressed the intercom button, her manicured nail tapping impatiently as she waited for a response. After a moment, a deep voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes." "Olivia Hartley, here for the final venue inspection," she announced, her tone clipped and professional. The gates swung open with a low creak, and Olivia strode purposefully up the winding driveway. As she approached the main entrance, she noticed a man kneeling by a flower bed, his hands deep in the soil as he tended to a row of vibrant hydrangeas. He was dressed simply in jeans and a faded t-shirt, his dark skin glistening with a sheen of sweat from working under warm sun. Assuming he was part of the groundskeeping staff, Olivia called out as she passed, "The hedges along the east wing need trimming before the event. See that it's taken care of." The man looked up, his brow furrowed slightly, but Olivia had already swept past him and up the grand marble steps to the front door. She rapped sharply on the ornate knocker, tapping her foot as she waited. After a moment, the door swung open, revealing a petite woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mrs. Hartley, welcome," she greeted with a warm smile. "I'm Agnes, the housekeeper. We've been expecting you. Please come in." Olivia stepped into the cavernous foyer, her eyes immediately drawn to the crystal chandelier that dominated the space. "Marvelous," she murmured, already envisioning how it would sparkle above her elegantly dressed guests. "I'll be happy to show you around," Agnes offered, gesturing towards the grand staircase. "Actually," Olivia interjected, "I'd like to speak with the owner first. Mr. Crawford, was it? I have some questions about potential modifications for the event." A flicker of confusion passed over Agnes's face. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Crawford is right here," a deep voice interrupted from behind them. Olivia turned to see the man from the garden standing in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. He'd removed his work gloves, revealing a gleaming watch that Olivia immediately recognized as a limited edition Patek Philippe, certainly not something she'd expect to see on a gardener's wrist. "Marcus Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "Owner of Evergreen Manor, and you must be Mrs. Hartley." Olivia faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected introduction. She quickly composed herself, slipping into her practiced socialite smile as she shook his hand. "Mr. Crawford, what a pleasure. I didn't realize. I was expecting. Someone else?" Marcus finished, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I get that a lot. Most people don't expect the owner to be elbow-deep in the hydrangeas." Olivia laughed, a touch too brightly, trying to mask her discomfort. "Of course, how wonderful that you take such a hands-on approach to maintaining the property. It's truly breathtaking." Marcus nodded, his expression neutral. "Thank you. Now, I believe you wanted to discuss some modifications for your event." "Yes, absolutely," Olivia replied, grateful for the shift in topic. She pulled out a tablet from her bag and began scrolling through her meticulously organized notes. "First, I was hoping we could discuss the possibility of setting up a temporary stage in the back garden for the live auction." As Olivia launched into her list of requests, Marcus listened attentively, occasionally offering insights or gentle pushback on ideas that might not be feasible. Despite her initial faux pas, Olivia found herself impressed by his knowledge and professionalism. Still, she couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. acutely aware of how quickly she had jumped to conclusions based solely on Marcus's appearance. The tour of the mansion proceeded, with Agnes leading the way and Marcus occasionally chiming in with historical anecdotes or pointing out unique architectural features. Olivia's mind raced, simultaneously taking mental notes for the event planning and grappling with her own internalized biases that had led to her earlier mistake. As they reached the grand ballroom, the centerpiece of the upcoming gala, Olivia's event planner instincts took over. She began peppering Marcus and Agnes with questions about capacity, electrical outlets, and the feasibility of various decorative elements. "The chandeliers are original to the house," Marcus explained, gesturing to the glittering fixtures above. "We've updated the wiring, of course, but we'll need to be careful about any additional lighting you plan to bring in." Olivia nodded, making a note on her tablet. "Understood. We'll work with your specifications. Now, about the catering kitchen." As they continued their discussion, Olivia found herself subtly studying Marcus. His knowledge of the property was encyclopedic, his manner confident yet unpretentious. She felt a twinge of shame as she recalled her dismissive attitude earlier, realizing how quickly she had categorized him based on superficial observations. The tour concluded back in the foyer, where Olivia turned to Marcus with a professional smile. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Crawford. Evergreen Manor is even more impressive than I'd imagined. I'm confident it will provide the perfect backdrop for our gala." Marcus nodded, his expression still somewhat guarded. "We're pleased to host your event, Mrs. Hartley. I hope it will be a successful evening for your foundation." As Olivia gathered her things to leave, she felt compelled to address the elephant in the room. "Mr. Crawford, I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. I made some unfair assumptions, and that was, well, it was inexcusable." Marcus regarded her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured. "I appreciate your apology, Mrs. Hartley. Unfortunately, it's not an uncommon occurrence. I hope this experience might encourage you to examine why you made those assumptions in the first place." Olivia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Yes, of course. I will certainly reflect on that." As she walked back to her car, Olivia's mind was churning. The encounter with Marcus had shaken her more than she cared to admit. She prided herself on being open-minded and socially conscious. After all, she shared a charitable foundation. But today's interaction had forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth that she still harbored unconscious biases. Sliding into the butter-soft leather seat of her Mercedes, Olivia took a deep breath. The gala was still her primary concern. There were 1,000 details to finalize, and the reputation of the Hartley Foundation rested on its success. Yet, as she pulled out of Evergreen Manor's driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that this event might end up challenging her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Over the next few days, Olivia threw herself into the final preparations for the gala. She coordinated with caterers, florists, and entertainers, ensuring every aspect of the event was polished to perfection. But even as she immersed herself in these familiar tasks, her encounter with Marcus Crawford lingered in the back of her mind. One afternoon, as she was reviewing the seating chart for the 10th time, Olivia's assistant, Zoe, poked her head into the office. "Mrs. Hartley, the final guest list just came in from Evergreen Manor. Mr. Crawford has requested 2 seats at table 1. Olivia looked up, surprised. It wasn't unusual for venue owners to attend events held on their property, but they typically maintained a low profile. Table 1 was reserved for the most prominent guests, major donors, local celebrities, and influential community leaders. "Table 1. Olivia repeated, her brow furrowed. "Did he say why?" Zoe shook her head. No explanation given, just a polite request for 2 seats. Olivia tapped her pen against her desk, considering. Part of her wanted to redirect Marcus to a less conspicuous table. After all, she had carefully curated the seating arrangements to facilitate important connections and potential donations. But another part of her, the part still stinging from their awkward first encounter, knew that such an action would only reinforce the very prejudices she was trying to overcome. "All right," she said finally. "Make the adjustment. Put Mr. Crawford and his guest at table 1. As Zoe left to update the seating chart, Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The gala was meant to be a celebration of the Hartley Foundation's work in the community, promoting education, funding medical research, and supporting local arts programs. But now, Olivia found herself wondering how much of that work was truly addressing the root causes of inequality and prejudice in their society. The day of the gala arrived in a whirlwind of last-minute preparations. Olivia arrived at Evergreen Manor early, overseeing the transformation of the grand estate into a glittering wonderland. Twinkling lights adorned the gardens, soft music drifted through the air, and the tantalizing aroma of gourmet hors d'oeuvres wafted from the catering tents. As the first guests began to arrive, Olivia stationed herself near the entrance, greeting each with a warm smile and a perfectly practiced air of graciousness. She was in her element here, effortlessly navigating the social currents of Hartford's elite. It wasn't until nearly an hour into the event that she spotted Marcus Crawford entering the ballroom. He cut a striking figure in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a stark contrast to the casual gardening attire she had first encountered him in. On his arm was an elegant woman in a shimmering gold gown, her natural hair styled in an elaborate updo. Olivia made her way through the crowd, champagne flute in hand, to greet them. "Mr. Crawford, welcome," she said, extending her hand. "I'm so pleased you could join us this evening." Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm and confident. "Mrs. Hartley, thank you for having us. May I introduce my wife, Dr. Amara Crawford?" Olivia turned to the woman, noting the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes. "Dr. Crawford, it's a pleasure. If you don't mind my asking, what is your field?" "Neurosurgery," Amara replied with a warm smile. "I specialize in pediatric cases at Hartford Hospital." Olivia blinked, impressed despite herself. That must be incredibly challenging and rewarding work. As they continued to chat, Olivia found herself genuinely engaged in the conversation. Marcus and Amara were articulate and insightful, offering perspectives on the Foundation's work that Olivia hadn't previously considered. "Your education initiative is commendable," Marcus was saying, "but have you considered partnering with community organizations to address some of the systemic barriers that prevent many students from accessing those opportunities in the first place?" Olivia paused, caught off guard by the astute observation. "Aye, that's an excellent point, Mr. Crawford. It's definitely something we should explore further." As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself repeatedly drawn back to Marcus and Amara's table. Their presence seemed to elevate the entire conversation, challenging the other guests to think more deeply about the issues at hand. During a lull in the festivities, Olivia stepped out onto a quiet balcony for a moment of reflection. The cool night air was a welcome respite from the crowded ballroom, and she took a deep breath, gazing out over the moonlit gardens. "Quite a view, isn't it?" a familiar voice said from behind her. Olivia turned to see Marcus joining her on the balcony, 2 fresh glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to her, which she accepted with a grateful smile. "Mr. Crawford," she began, then paused, searching for the right words. "I wanted to thank you, not just for hosting this event, but for opening my eyes, I suppose." Marcus raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. Olivia took a sip of champagne, gathering her thoughts. "When we first met, I made assumptions about you based solely on your appearance. It was wrong, and it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. But tonight, seeing you and Dr. Crawford, hearing your insights, it's made me realize how much more the Foundation could be doing to address the real, systemic issues in our community." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Recognition is the first step, Mrs. Hartley. The question is, what will you do with that awareness?" As Olivia opened her mouth to respond, a commotion from inside the ballroom caught their attention. They turned to see Zoe hurrying towards them, a look of panic on her face. "Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Crawford, you need to come quickly," she gasped. "There's been an incident with one of the guests. I think you both need to see this." Exchanging a worried glance, Olivia and Marcus followed Zoe back into the ballroom, the peaceful moment on the balcony shattered. As they pushed through the crowd of murmuring guests, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge her and the Hartley Foundation in ways she had never anticipated. Escalation. The murmur of the crowd grew louder as Olivia and Marcus pushed their way through the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. At the center of the commotion, they found a scene that made Olivia's heart sink. Gerald Whitmore, one of the Foundation's most prominent donors, was red-faced and gesticulating wildly. Across from him stood a young black woman, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. Olivia recognized her as Tasha Johnson, a scholarship recipient who had been invited to speak about how the Hartley Foundation had impacted her life. "You don't belong here," Gerald was shouting, his words slightly slurred. "This event is for the people who actually contribute to society, not freeloaders looking for handouts." Tasha stood her ground, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I've earned my place here, Mr. Whitmore, and I contribute plenty to society, more than someone who just writes checks to feel good about themselves." Olivia felt her chest tighten. This was a disaster. She stepped forward, plastering on her most placating smile. "Gerald, Tasha, please. Let's all take a deep breath and—" But before she could finish, Marcus moved past her, placing himself between Gerald and Tasha. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Gerald blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He squinted at Marcus, then let out a bark of laughter. "Leave? Do you have any idea who I am? Who do you think you are to tell me to leave?" "I'm Marcus Crawford," Marcus replied evenly. "I own this estate, and I won't tolerate this kind of behavior on my property." A hush fell over the crowd. Gerald's face cycled through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a sneer of contempt. "Oh, I see. So this is what it's come to. Letting the help play dress up and pretend they're in charge." Olivia felt as though she'd been doused in ice water. She stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Gerald, that's completely out of line. Mr. Crawford is not the help, he's—" But Gerald was too far gone, his face purple with rage and alcohol. "I've donated hundreds of thousands to this foundation, and this is the thanks I get, being lectured by a glorified groundskeeper." Marcus remained outwardly calm, but Olivia could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "Mr. Whitmore, this is your last warning. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to tell me what to do, boy." The racial slur hung in the air like a thunderclap. Olivia saw Marcus flinch as if he'd been struck. For a moment, no one moved. Then several things happened in quick succession. Tasha, who had been watching the exchange with growing horror, suddenly surged forward. "How dare you?" she shouted, her hand raised as if to slap Gerald. Marcus, reacting on instinct, reached out to hold her back. "Tasha, don't." Olivia, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, stepped between them. "Everyone, please, let's just—" And then, in a blur of motion and a gasp from the crowd, Gerald's hand shot out. Whether he was aiming for Tasha or Marcus wasn't clear, but it was Olivia who caught the brunt of the blow. She stumbled backward, her cheeks stinging, eyes wide with shock. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed frozen into blow. Then chaos erupted. Security guards materialized, restraining Gerald as he continued to shout obscenities. Guests pressed forward and back, some trying to get a better view of the drama, others attempting to distance themselves from the scene. Olivia's assistant, Zoe, appeared at her side, fussing over her and asking if she needed medical attention. Through the pandemonium, Olivia's eyes locked with Marcus's. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but there was something else there too, a wariness, a sadness that spoke of too many similar encounters. As the security team began to escort a still protesting Gerald from the premises, Olivia felt a gentle hand on her arm. She turned to see Amara Crawford, concern etched on her face. "Mrs. Hartley, are you all right?" Amara asked, her professional demeanor taking over. "That looks like it might bruise. We should get some ice on it." Olivia nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to a quiet corner of the ballroom. As Amara pressed a cloth-wrapped ice pack to her cheek, Olivia's mind raced. How had things fallen apart so quickly? How could she salvage this disaster? Marcus joined them a few moments later, his posture tense. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm so sorry. This is inexcusable. If there's anything I can do—" "No," Olivia interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "No, Mr. Crawford, I'm the one who should be apologizing. This is my event, my responsibility. And the way Mr. Whitmore spoke to you, it's unforgivable." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Unfortunately, it's not an uncommon experience, but that doesn't make it acceptable." Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool press of the ice pack against her throbbing cheek. When she opened them again, she saw Tasha hovering nearby, looking unsure and upset. "Tasha," Olivia called softly, "please come here." The young woman approached cautiously. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. If I hadn't argued with Mr. Whitmore—" "No," Olivia said firmly. "This is not your fault. You have every right to be here, to speak your mind, and to be treated with respect." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I owe you an apology, Tasha. The Foundation, we've been so focused on the optics of helping, on making ourselves feel good, that we've failed to truly listen to the people we claim to serve." Tasha's eyes widened in surprise. "Mrs. Hartley, But Olivia wasn't finished. She turned to Marcus, her gaze steady despite the pain in her cheek. "And Mr. Crawford, I owe you an even greater apology. Not just for tonight, but for my own behavior when we first met. I made the same assumptions as Gerald, even if I expressed them less viciously. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, Mrs. Hartley. But if I may, actions speak louder than words. What do you plan to do now?" Olivia straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. "First, I'm going to address our guests. Then, Mr. Crawford, if you're willing, I'd like to sit down with you, Dr. Crawford, and Tasha to discuss how we can make real, substantive changes to the Foundation's approach." With Amara's help, Olivia made her way to the small stage that had been set up for speeches. The room fell silent as she took her place behind the microphone, the bright lights highlighting the angry red mark on her cheek. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I want to apologize for the disruption to our evening. But more than that, I want to apologize for the Foundation's failings." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Olivia pressed on. "Tonight, we've seen the ugly face of prejudice and privilege rear its head in our midst. And while it's easy to condemn one man's drunken rantings, the truth is, his words reflect a deeper problem, one that exists not just in our society, but in the very way we've approached our charitable work." She paused, scanning the faces of the assembled guests. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few nodded in agreement. The Hartley Foundation was created to make a difference in our community, but tonight has shown me that we've been going about it all wrong. We've been patting ourselves on the back for our generosity while failing to address the root causes of inequality and injustice. Olivia's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Starting tomorrow, we're going to change that. We're going to listen to the people we claim to help. We're going to confront our own biases and privileges, and we're going to use our resources and influence to push for real, systemic change." She saw Marcus and Amara in the crowd, watching her intently. Tasha stood nearby, her eyes shining with a mix of emotions. I know this isn't what many of you came here expecting to hear tonight. Some of you may disagree with this new direction, but I hope you'll join us in this journey, because the work we've been doing, while well-intentioned, isn't enough. We need to do better. We must do better. As Olivia concluded her speech, the ballroom erupted into a mix of applause, excited chatter, and a few disgruntled mutters. She stepped down from the stage on shaky legs, immediately surrounded by a swirl of guests wanting to offer support, ask questions, or voice concerns. Through the crowd, she caught Marcus's eye. He gave her a small nod of approval, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As the evening wound down and the last of the guests departed, Olivia found herself once again on the balcony, staring out at the moonlit gardens. The events of the night played on a loop in her mind: the confrontation, the shock of Gerald's blow, the moment of clarity that had led to her impromptu speech. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Marcus approaching, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. "I thought you could use this," he said, offering her one of the mugs. "It's chamomile. Good for frayed nerves." Olivia accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford, for the tea and for, well, everything tonight." Marcus leaned against the balustrade, his own mug cradled in his hands. "You surprised me tonight, Mrs. Hartley. That speech, it wasn't what I expected." "To be honest, it wasn't what I expected either," Olivia admitted with a rueful laugh. "But it needed to be said, and now comes the hard part of actually following through." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It won't be easy. You'll face resistance, not just from people like Gerald Whitmore, but from those who are comfortable with the status quo. Even those who consider themselves progressive may balk when real change is on the table." "I know," Olivia sighed, "but after tonight, I can't go back to business as usual. I don't want to." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their tea and gazing out at the grounds of Evergreen Manor. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "Mrs. Hartley, I've been thinking. If you're serious about this new direction for the foundation, I may be able to help. I have connections in the community, experiences that could provide valuable insight, and Amara, well, her work at the hospital has given her a unique perspective on the healthcare challenges facing underprivileged communities." Olivia turned to him, hope blooming in her chest. "Mr. Crawford, I would be honored to have your input, both yours and Dr. Crawford's, and please call me Olivia." Marcus smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Then you must call me Marcus." He extended his hand. "To new beginnings." Olivia clasped his hand firmly. "To new beginnings," she agreed. As they shook hands, Olivia felt the weight of the evening's events, but also a spark of excitement for what lay ahead. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. The gentle chime of the manor's clock striking midnight floated through the air. Olivia straightened, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "There's so much to do tomorrow." Marcus nodded. "Get some rest, Olivia. The work will still be there in the morning." As Olivia gathered her things and prepared to leave, she paused at the grand entrance of Evergreen Manor. She turned back to Marcus, who stood in the doorway. "Thank you," she said softly, "for opening my eyes, for giving me a second chance." Marcus's reply was equally soft, but filled with quiet conviction. "We all deserve second chances, Olivia. It's what we do with them that matters." With a final nod, Olivia stepped out into the cool night air. As her car pulled away from Evergreen Manor, she felt as though she was leaving more than just a venue behind. She was leaving behind old assumptions, comfortable illusions, and a version of herself that she had outgrown. The road ahead was uncertain, but as the lights of the manor faded in her rearview mirror, Olivia felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and hard work. But for tonight, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope for real change, hope for understanding, and hoped for a future where events like tonight's would become a relic of the past. As she drove home through the quiet streets of Hartford, Olivia began to plan. There were board members to call, initiatives to reevaluate, and bridges to build. But more than that, there was learning to be done about her own biases, about the real needs of her community, and about the complex, often uncomfortable work of creating meaningful change. The night's events had shaken her world, but as Olivia pulled into her driveway, she realized that sometimes it takes a seismic shift to set things right. With a deep breath, she stepped out of her car, ready to face whatever challenges the new day would bring. Revelations. The morning after the gala dawned bright and clear, but Olivia Hartley felt anything but refreshed. She sat at her kitchen island, nursing a cup of strong coffee and scrolling through the flood of emails and text messages on her phone. News of last night's events had spread quickly through Hartford's high society, and opinions were sharply divided. Some praised her impromptu speech as brave and long overdue. Others decried it as a betrayal of the foundation's core donors. A few simply expressed confusion, unsure what to make of the dramatic shift in tone. Olivia sighed, setting down her phone. The bruise on her cheek had blossomed overnight into a vivid purple, a stark reminder of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. As she giddily applied concealer, trying to minimize the mark, her mind wandered back to the conversation she'd had with Marcus Crawford on the balcony. There was something about Marcus that intrigued her. His poise in the face of Gerald's racist outburst, his quiet strength, the depth of understanding in his eyes. It all spoke of a man who had faced more than his fair share of challenges. Olivia's reverie was interrupted by the chime of her doorbell. Frowning, she made her way to the front door, wondering who could be calling so early. To her surprise, she found Tasha Johnson standing on her doorstep, looking nervous but determined. "Tasha," Olivia said, momentarily taken aback. "I wasn't expecting. Please come in." The young woman stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in the opulent foyer of Olivia's home. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. After last night, I felt like I needed to talk to you." Olivia led Tasha to the living room, gesturing for her to take a seat on one of the plush sofas. "Of course, I understand. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" Tasha shook her head. "No, thank you. I won't take up much of your time. I just wanted to say..." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "What you said last night about changing the Foundation's approach, did you mean it?" The question hung in the air between them. Olivia sat down across from Tasha, meeting her gaze steadily. "Yes, Tasha, I meant every word." Tasha nodded slowly. "Okay, because I have some things I think you need to hear about what it's really like to be on the receiving end of the Foundation's help." For the next hour, Olivia listened as Tasha shared her experiences. The young woman spoke of the pressure to be a success story, of feeling like a token at Foundation events, of the well-meaning but often misguided attempts to fix her community without truly understanding its needs. As Tasha talked, Olivia felt a mix of emotions wash over her: shame at her own ignorance, anger at the systemic issues that had gone unaddressed, and a growing resolve to do better. When Tasha finally fell silent, Olivia leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you, Tasha, for your honesty and for trusting me with your story. I promise you, things are going to change." Tasha smiled, a tentative hope in her eyes. "I believe you, Mrs. Hartley, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." As Tasha left, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had a long day ahead, a board meeting to prepare for, donors to placate, and a mountain of work to begin reshaping the Foundation's mission. But first, there was one more conversation she needed to have. Picking up her phone, she dialed the number Marcus Crawford had given her the night before. "Mr. Crawford, Marcus," she corrected herself when he answered. "I was hoping we could meet today. There's a lot I'd like to discuss." A few hours later, Olivia found herself back at Evergreen Manor, this time seated in Marcus's private study. The room was a far cry from the opulent ballroom where they'd first clashed. Warm wood paneling lined the walls, interspersed with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Large windows overlooked the estate's meticulously maintained gardens. Marcus sat behind an antique desk, his posture relaxed but attentive. Amara perched on the edge of the desk, her keen gaze fixed on Olivia. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Olivia began. "After last night, and my conversation with Tasha this morning, I realize there's so much I don't know, so much I need to understand if I'm going to make real changes at the foundation." Marcus nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Understanding is a good place to start. What would you like to know?" Olivia took a deep breath. "Everything. Your story, how you came to own Evergreen Manor, your experiences in this community. I want to understand the challenges you faced, the things the foundation has been blind to all these years." For a moment, Marcus was quiet, exchanging a glance with Amara. Then he began to speak. "Evergreen Manor has been in my family for 3 generations," he said, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "My grandfather, William Crawford, worked here as a groundskeeper in the 1940s. The original owners, the Montgomerys, had fallen on hard times after the war. They were land-rich but cash-poor, struggling to maintain the estate." Marcus stood, moving to the window. "My grandfather saw an opportunity. He'd been saving every penny he earned, dreaming of owning his own piece of land someday. He approached Mr. Montgomery with an offer to buy a small parcel of the estate, just enough to build a modest home for his family." Olivia listened, rapt, as Marcus continued his tale. He spoke of how Mr. Montgomery, desperate for cash and seeing something of himself in the ambitious young groundskeeper, had made a counter-offer. If William could raise enough money to cover the estate's debts, he could have the whole property. It was an impossible task, Marcus said, a note of pride in his voice. But my grandfather was nothing if not determined. He worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. He enlisted the help of friends and family, pooling their resources, and miraculously, within a year, he had the money. Amara picked up the thread of the story. But of course, it wasn't that simple. When word got out that a black man was buying Evergreen Manor, there was an uproar. The banks refused to give William a loan. The local government tried to block the sale on technicalities. Some of the neighbors even threatened violence. Marcus nodded grimly. It took years of legal battles and sheer persistence, but eventually my grandfather prevailed. He became the owner of Evergreen Manor, the first black owner of a major estate in this part of Connecticut. Olivia shook her head, amazed. "I had no idea. But why isn't this common knowledge? It's an incredible story." "Because for a long time, it was safer to keep it quiet," Marcus explained. "My grandfather maintained the fiction that he was still just the groundskeeper. He lived in the small cottage on the edge of the property, while the main house stood empty. It wasn't until my father's generation that we could openly claim ownership without fear of reprisal." As Marcus and Amara continued to share their family history, Olivia felt as though scales were falling from her eyes. They spoke of the challenges each generation had faced, the constant need to prove themselves, the subtle and not so subtle discrimination, the weight of being the first, or the only in so many spaces. "That's why I still work in the gardens sometimes," Marcus said with a small smile. "It connects me to my grandfather's legacy." And he added, a hint of mischief in his eyes, "It's a good way to see how people really act when they think no one important is watching." Olivia winced, remembering her own dismissive behavior when she'd first encountered Marcus in the garden. "I owe you another apology," she said softly. Marcus waved it away. "You've already apologized, Olivia. What matters now is what you do going forward." Amara leaned forward, her expression intense. "That's why we agreed to meet with you today. We've seen a lot of well-meaning white people have moments of revelation, make big promises, and then nothing really changes. We need to know that you're serious about this." Olivia met Amara's gaze, understanding the challenge in her words. "I am serious. more serious than I've ever been about anything. But I also know that I have a lot to learn. That's why I'm here. I want your help, your guidance, in reshaping the Foundation's mission and approach." Marcus and Amara exchanged another look, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Marcus spoke. "All right, Olivia, we're willing to work with you, but we have some conditions." Over the next few hours, they hashed out a plan. The Crawfords would join the Foundation's board, bringing their unique perspectives and community connections. They would help develop new initiatives focused on addressing systemic inequalities, with a particular emphasis on education and healthcare, Amara's area of expertise. In return, Olivia committed to a top-to-bottom review of the Foundation's practices, to actively seeking out and amplifying diverse voices, and to using her influence to push for broader societal changes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the study, Olivia felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The task ahead was daunting, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as Olivia prepared to leave. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. "This is my grandfather's journal. It details his struggle to acquire and maintain Evergreen Manor and the challenges our family has faced over the years. I'd like you to read it." Olivia accepted the book with reverence, understanding the trust Marcus was placing in her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise to treat it with the respect it deserves." As she drove home that evening, the weight of the journal on the seat beside her, Olivia's mind raced with everything she had learned. The story of Evergreen Manor, the generations of struggle and triumph it represented, had shaken her to her core. She thought of her own family's history, the generations of privilege that had allowed her to take so much for granted. She thought of all the assumptions she had made, the biases she had never examined, the injustices she had unknowingly perpetuated. Pulling into her driveway, Olivia made a decision. She would start reading William Crawford's journal tonight. And tomorrow, she would begin the hard work of transforming the Hartley Foundation into a true force for change. As she settled into her favorite reading chair, carefully opening the well-worn journal, Olivia felt a sense of standing on the precipice of something monumental. The revelations of the past 2 days had irrevocably altered her worldview. Now, it was time to turn that newfound understanding into action. With a deep breath, she began to read, allowing William Crawford's words to transport her to a different time, a different perspective. Each page turned was another step on her journey of understanding, another break in the foundation of the change she was committed to creating. The night deepened around her as Olivia read on, absorbing the triumphs and tragedies, the hopes and fears, of a family that had faced adversity with unwavering determination. And with each passing hour, her resolve strengthened. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through her windows, Olivia had finished the journal. She sat for a long moment, letting the full weight of William Crawford's story settle over her. Then, with renewed purpose, she reached for her phone. There were calls to make, meetings to arrange, and a foundation to rebuild. The path ahead would be challenging, fraught with obstacles and resistance. But as Olivia dialed the first number, her board chair, who would undoubtedly be surprised by such an early call, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The revelations of the past 2 days had changed everything. Now, it was time to ensure that those changes lasted, that the lessons learned became actions taken, and that the Hartley Foundation became a true catalyst for the kind of deep, systemic change that was long overdue. As the phone began to ring, Olivia took a deep breath. The real work was just beginning. Reflection. The weeks following the tumultuous gala passed in a whirlwind of activity for Olivia Hartley. Board meetings, press conferences, and late-night strategy sessions blurred together as she fought to steer the Hartley Foundation in its new direction. But on this crisp autumn morning, she found herself alone in her office, staring out the window at the city skyline, allowing herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. The journal William Crawford had entrusted to her sat on her desk, its pages now dog-eared and filled with sticky notes. Olivia ran her fingers over the worn leather cover, marveling at how this single book had so profoundly altered her perspective. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, turning to see her assistant, Zoe, enter with a steaming mug of coffee. "Thought you could use this," Zoe said, setting the mug down. "You've been going non-stop for weeks." Olivia smiled gratefully. "Thanks, Zoe. I don't know what I'd do without you." She paused, studying the young woman's face. "How are you holding up with all the changes around here?" Zoe considered the question for a moment. "Honestly, it's been challenging, but exciting too. I feel like we're finally doing work that really matters." As Zoe left, closing the door softly behind her, Olivia sipped her coffee and let her mind wander back over the events of the past few weeks. The initial announcement of the Foundation's new direction had been met with mixed reactions. Some board members had resigned in protest, unwilling to embrace such a dramatic shift. Others, particularly younger members and those from more diverse backgrounds, had thrown their full support behind the initiative. Donors were similarly divided. A few, like Gerald Whitmore, had publicly withdrawn their support, decrying what they saw as a betrayal of the Foundation's values. But for every donor lost, it seemed two more stepped up, energized by the promise of real, systemic change. Olivia had been surprised and touched by the outpouring of support from unexpected quarters. Community leaders, grassroots organizations, and ordinary citizens had reached out, offering their insights, expertise, and assistance. But the path forward was far from smooth. Every day brought new challenges, difficult conversations, and moments of self-doubt. Olivia found herself constantly questioning her decisions, acutely aware of how much she still had to learn. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Marcus. "Meeting with the Education Committee in an hour. Don't forget to bring the proposal for the new scholarship program." Olivia smiled, grateful once again for Marcus's steady presence throughout this tumultuous period. His insights, along with Amara's, had been invaluable as they worked to reshape the Foundation's approach. Gathering her materials for the meeting, Olivia paused at the door of her office. Her eyes fell on a framed photo on the wall, a picture of her father, Charles Hartley, at the opening of the Foundation's first headquarters decades ago. She studied his beaming face, wondering what he would think of the changes she was making to his legacy. "I hope you'd understand, Dad," she murmured. "I hope you'd be proud." Across town, in the sunlit study of Evergreen Manor, Marcus Crawford sat at his desk, poring over a stack of reports. Budget projections, program proposals, and community feedback surveys littered the polished wood surface. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes tiredly. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, filled with both exciting possibilities and daunting challenges. While he was heartened by the Foundation's new direction, he couldn't shake a lingering sense of weariness. Amara's voice drifted in from the adjoining room where she was on a video call with her colleagues at the hospital. "Yes, the new pediatric outreach program is directly tied to the Foundation's initiatives. We're hoping to see a significant increase in early interventions and preventative care." Marcus smiled, marveling at his wife's ability to seamlessly blend her medical expertise with the Foundation's evolving mission. Her passion for addressing healthcare disparities had become a cornerstone of their new approach. As Amara's call wound down, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to Olivia Hartley. He had to admit she had surprised him. When they first met, he had dismissed her as just another well-meaning, but ultimately ineffective socialite. Her reaction to Gerald Whitmore's outburst and her subsequent commitment to change had forced him to reassess his initial judgment. Still, a lifetime of experience had taught Marcus to be cautious. He'd seen too many diversity initiatives and inclusion programs fizzle out once the initial excitement wore off. The real test would come in the months and years ahead, when the hard work of creating lasting change would require sustained effort and unwavering commitment. Amara entered the study, interrupting his musings. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, perching on the edge of his desk. Marcus sighed, gesturing at the papers strewn across his desk. Just thinking about all of this. The foundation, Olivia, the changes we're trying to make. Part of me is excited, but another part is waiting for the other shoe to drop. Amara finished for him. He nodded. Am I being too cynical? Amara considered for a moment. I don't think so. Caution is warranted, given our experiences. But Marcus, I've been watching Olivia closely these past weeks. I think she's genuine in her desire to make a difference. I hope you're right, Marcus said softly. Amara reached out, squeezing his hand. We've spent our whole lives fighting for a seat at the table. Now we have a chance to help reshape the table itself. It's okay to be cautious, but don't let that stop us from seizing this opportunity. Marcus nodded, drawing strength from his wife's words. You're right, as usual, he said with a small smile. I just hope we can live up to the legacy my grandfather left us. Amara's eyes softened. William would be proud of you, Marcus. Of both of us. We're carrying on his fight, just in a different arena. As they prepared to leave for the meeting at the foundation, Marcus paused in front of the portrait of his grandfather that hung in the foyer. William Crawford's eyes seemed to follow him, filled with a mixture of pride and challenge. We won't let you down, Marcus whispered, more to himself than to the portrait. Across the city, in a small apartment filled with textbooks and dreams, Tasha Johnson sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop open before her. She was putting the finishing touches on a presentation she would be giving at the next Foundation Board meeting. A comprehensive overview of the challenges facing students from underprivileged backgrounds. Tasha saved the file and closed her laptop, letting out a long breath. If someone had told her a month ago that she'd be preparing to address the board of the Hartley Foundation, she would have laughed in disbelief. Yet here she was, her ideas and experiences now valued and sought after. The weeks since the gala had been a whirlwind of emotions for Tasha. Initial skepticism had given way to cautious hope as she watched Olivia Hartley make good on her promises. The foundation was changing, slowly but surely, and Tasha found herself at the forefront of that change. But with this new role came new pressures. Tasha felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, not just to herself, but to her community, to all the students who shared her background and faced similar challenges. She picked up a framed photo from her nightstand, a picture of her mother, smiling proudly at Tasha's high school graduation. I'm trying to make a difference, Mom, she said softly. I hope I'm doing the right thing. A text message alert broke the moment. It was from Olivia. Looking forward to your presentation tomorrow. Your insights have been invaluable. Thank you for trusting us with your story. Tasha smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever doubts she had, whatever challenges lay ahead, she was committed to seeing this through. The chance to create real change was worth the risk. As the day of the board meeting dawned, each of our protagonists found themselves at a moment of quiet reflection. Olivia, arriving early at the Foundation's offices, took a moment to center herself. The past weeks had been a crucible, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and the world she inhabited. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of wondering if she was in over her head. But with each challenge faced, each difficult conversation navigated, she felt herself growing stronger, more resolute in her commitment to change. Marcus, straightening his tie in the mirror at Evergreen Manor, thought of his grandfather. He imagined William Crawford's journey, from groundskeeper to owner, fighting against a system designed to keep him in his place. Marcus felt the weight of that legacy, but also its strength. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same determination that had seen his family through generations of struggle. Amara, reviewing her notes one last time before leaving for the meeting, reflected on the patients she saw every day at the hospital. Children facing health challenges compounded by systemic inequalities, families struggling to navigate a complex and often unfair healthcare system. Her work with the Foundation was a chance to address these issues at their root, to create change that would ripple out far beyond the walls of her hospital. And Tasha, taking a deep breath as she entered the imposing building that housed the Hartley Foundation, thought of all the students like her, bright, ambitious, but held back by circumstances beyond their control. She straightened her shoulders, reminding herself that her voice mattered, that her experiences and insights were valuable. This was her chance to open doors for others, to be the change she wished to see. As they converged in the boardroom, each coming from their own place of reflection, there was a palpable sense of purpose in the air. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges both known and unforeseen. But in this moment, brought together by a shared commitment to creating meaningful change, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. Olivia called the meeting to order, her voice steady and confident. "Good morning, everyone. We have a lot of ground to cover today, but before we begin, I want to thank you all for your dedication these past weeks. What we're doing isn't easy, but it's necessary. Together, we have the opportunity to create real, lasting change in our community." As nods of agreement rippled around the table, Olivia caught Marcus's eye. He gave her a small smile of encouragement, and she felt a surge of gratitude for his support and guidance. "Now," Olivia continued, "let's get started. Tasha, we're looking forward to your presentation on the challenges facing students in underserved communities." Tasha stood, her nervousness giving way to determination as she began to speak. The room fell silent, all eyes on this young woman whose voice, just weeks ago, might never have been heard in this setting. As Tasha's presentation unfolded, weaving personal experiences with hard data and insightful analysis, the atmosphere in the room shifted. There was a growing sense of energy, of possibility, as board members began to see their work through a new lens. This meeting, this moment, was more than just a reflection on the past or a planning session for the future. It was the culmination of weeks of soul-searching, of difficult conversations and paradigm shifts. But more than that, it was a beginning, the start of a new chapter for the Hartley Foundation and for each person in that room. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, resistance, moments of doubt. But as Olivia looked around the table, at Marcus's quiet strength, Amara's passionate expertise, Tasha's bold vision, and the engaged faces of the other board members, she felt a surge of hope. They were no longer just reflecting on the need for change. They were becoming that change, step by step, decision by decision. And in that moment of shared purpose, the future, with all its challenges and possibilities, felt wide open. Reconciliation. The autumn leaves were turning golden in the gardens of Evergreen Manor as Olivia Hartley's car crunched up the gravel driveway. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala that had changed everything, and the Hartley Foundation was in the midst of its most ambitious transformation yet. Olivia stepped out of her car, smoothing down her blazer and taking a deep breath of the crisp air. Today's meeting wasn't just another strategy session or board review. It was something far more personal and, in many ways, more challenging. Marcus greeted her at the door, his expression a mixture of warmth and caution. "Olivia, welcome. Thank you for coming." As she followed him into the study, Olivia's eyes fell on the other occupant of the room. Gerald Whitmore sat stiffly in an armchair, his once haughty demeanor now tinged with discomfort and uncertainty. The tension in the room was palpable as Olivia took a seat across from Gerald. Marcus positioned himself between them, both a mediator and a buffer. "Mr. Whitmore," Olivia began, her voice calm but firm, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us today." Gerald nodded curtly, his eyes darting between Olivia and Marcus. "I'll admit I was surprised by your invitation." "We appreciate you coming," Marcus said, his tone neutral. "We believe it's important to have this conversation, no matter how difficult it might be." Over the next hour, the three of them engaged in a frank and often uncomfortable dialogue. Gerald, stripped of his usual bluster, spoke of his fear of change, of feeling left behind in a world that no longer seemed to value the traditions he held dear. He didn't excuse his behavior at the gala, but he tried to explain the anger and insecurity that had fueled it. Olivia and Marcus listened, occasionally challenging Gerald's assumptions or offering alternative perspectives. They shared stories of their own experiences, the challenges they faced, and the reasons behind the Foundation's new direction. As the conversation progressed, the atmosphere in the room gradually shifted. The initial tension began to ease, replaced by a cautious openness. "I won't pretend that hearing all of this is easy," Gerald admitted at one point, his voice gruff with emotion. "It goes against so much of what I've always believed, but I'm trying to understand." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes intense. "That's all we're asking, Gerald. Not that you agree with everything, but that you're willing to listen, to consider other perspectives." Marcus nodded in agreement. Change isn't easy for any of us, but it's necessary if we want to create a more just and equitable society. As the meeting drew to a close, Gerald stood, extending his hand first to Marcus, then to Olivia. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on me, for being willing to have this conversation." After Gerald had left, Olivia and Marcus stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just occurred. "Do you think we got through to him?" Olivia asked finally. Marcus considered the question. "I think we made a start. Change doesn't happen overnight, especially when it comes to deeply held beliefs. But he was here, he listened. That's something." Olivia nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. "It's a beginning." The conversation with Gerald was just one of many challenging dialogues that Olivia found herself navigating in the months following the Foundation's change in direction. Each day seemed to bring new obstacles, but also new opportunities for growth and understanding. One crisp morning, Olivia found herself in a community center in one of Hartford's underserved neighborhoods. The Foundation was launching a new education initiative, and Olivia was there to meet with local parents and teachers. As she listened to their stories, tales of overcrowded classrooms, outdated textbooks, and students full of potential but lacking in resources, Olivia felt the full weight of the Foundation's responsibility. These weren't just statistics on a report. They were real people, real lives that could be changed by the decisions she and the board made. Tasha, who had become an invaluable part of the Foundation's outreach team, sat beside Olivia, occasionally leaning over to provide context or additional insight. Watching the young woman interact with the community members, her passion and empathy evident in every word, Olivia felt a surge of pride. This was the future of the Hartley Foundation, not just writing checks, but truly engaging with and uplifting the communities they served. After the meeting, as they walked back to the car, Tasha turned to Olivia. "You know, when you first talked about changing the Foundation, I didn't really believe it would happen. I've seen too many empty promises." Olivia nodded, understanding the skepticism. "And now?" Tasha smiled, a mix of determination and hope in her eyes. "Now I think we might actually have a chance to make a real difference. It won't be easy, but I'm glad to be part of it." The Foundation's new approach wasn't just affecting its external work, it was transforming the organization from the inside out. Under Amara's guidance, they had implemented a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program for all staff and board members. These sessions were often uncomfortable, forcing people to confront their own biases and privileges. There were heated discussions, tears shed, and moments of profound realization. But slowly, steadily, a new culture was emerging, one of openness, empathy, and genuine commitment to equity. One afternoon, following a particularly intense session, Olivia found herself in her office with Zoe, her assistant. The young woman had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the day's discussions. "So," Olivia asked gently, "is everything all right? You seemed distracted during the meeting." Zoe was quiet for a moment, then spoke hesitantly. "It's just, all of this has made me think about my own family. My grandfather, he has some pretty outdated views. We've argued about it for years, but after everything we've been learning here, I'm starting to understand where those views come from. I'm wondering if maybe I've been going about it all wrong, trying to change his mind." Olivia nodded, understanding the young woman's struggle. Sometimes the hardest conversations are with the people closest to us, but they're often the most important. "How do you do it?" Zoe asked, her voice small. How do you keep having these difficult conversations day after day? Olivia considered the question carefully. I remind myself that every conversation, every small step forward, is part of a larger change. And I remember that I'm not alone in this. We're all learning and growing together. As the weeks turned into months, the Foundation's new initiatives began to bear fruit. The education program was showing promising early results, with increased graduation rates and college acceptances in partner schools. The healthcare outreach, spearheaded by Amara, was providing vital services to communities that had long been underserved. But perhaps the most significant change was less tangible. There was a new energy, a sense of purpose that permeated every aspect of the Foundation's work. Staff members who had once seen their jobs as just that, jobs, were now passionate advocates of the Foundation's mission. One evening, as the sun set over the Hartford skyline, Olivia found herself once again in Marcus's study at Evergreen Manor. They had fallen into the habit of regular check-ins, a chance to step back and assess their progress. "I received an interesting call today," Marcus said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "From Gerald Whitmore, of all people." Olivia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what do you want?" "To volunteer," Marcus replied. "He's been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation. He wants to help with the education initiative. Said he's got a lot to learn, but he wants to try." Olivia sat back, pleasantly surprised. "Well, that's unexpected." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a small step, but it's a reminder that change is possible, even in the most unlikely places." As they continued their discussion, reviewing the challenges and victories of the past months, Olivia felt a deep sense of gratitude. For Marcus's guidance, for Amara's expertise, for Tasha's passion, for every person who had joined them on this journey of transformation. The path forward was still long and undoubtedly filled with obstacles. But as she looked at Marcus, at the portrait of William Crawford on the wall, at the grounds of Evergreen Manor stretching out beyond the window, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just talking about change. They were making it happen, one conversation, one program, one life at a time. And in that moment, Olivia knew that this difficult, messy, vitally important work was exactly where she was meant to be. As the meeting drew to a close, Marcus walked Olivia to her car. The night air was cool, stars just beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. "You know," Marcus said, his voice thoughtful, "my grandfather used to say that true change isn't about tearing everything down and starting over. It's about building bridges, finding common ground, even with those who seem the farthest from us." Olivia nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. "It's not easy," she admitted. "No," Marcus agreed, "but it's necessary. And I think we're on the right path." As Olivia drove home that night, she reflected on the journey of the past months. The Foundation had changed, yes, but so had she. She had been forced to confront her own biases, to question long-held assumptions, to listen and learn in ways she never had before. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of frustration, of wanting to fall back into old, comfortable patterns. But with each challenge overcome, each difficult conversation navigated, she had grown stronger, more committed to the path they had chosen. The work of reconciliation, with others, with oneself, with the complex realities of the world, was ongoing. It was a process, not a destination. But as Olivia pulled into her driveway, she felt a sense of peace. They were making progress, step by step, conversation by conversation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth and understanding. But tonight, Olivia allowed herself to feel a quiet pride in how far they had come and hope for the journey that lay ahead. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Olivia's dreams were filled with images of bridges being built, of hands reaching across divides, of a future where understanding and empathy trumped fear and division. It was a future worth fighting for, worth all the difficult conversations and hard-won progress. And in the morning, she would wake ready to continue that fight, to keep building those bridges, one day at a time. They paused by a bench overlooking a vibrant flower bed. In the distance, they could see Amara engaged in an animated conversation with a group of medical students, participants in the Foundation's new scholarship program for aspiring healthcare professionals from underrepresented communities. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately," Marcus said, his eyes on the historic manor house. "What we leave behind, how we'll be remembered." Olivia followed his gaze, understanding the weight of history that Evergreen Manor represented. "Your grandfather would be proud, Marcus, of you, of what this place has become." Marcus smiled, a mix of pride and determination in his eyes. "I hope so, but I also know he'd be the first to say our work isn't done. There's always more to do, more bridges to build." As they continued their walk, they came across Tasha, who was leading a group of teenagers on a tour of the grounds. The young woman who had once felt out of place at Foundation events was now confidently explaining the manor's history and the Foundation's current initiatives. "Miss Hartley, Mr. Crawford," Tasha called out, waving them over. "I was just telling these students about the summer internship program. Would you like to add anything?" Olivia and Marcus spent the next half hour talking with the students, answering questions about the Foundation's work and sharing their own journeys. The teenagers' enthusiasm and insightful questions left Olivia feeling energized and hopeful for the future. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Evergreen Manor, Olivia found a quiet moment to herself. She stood on the balcony where, 5 years ago, she and Marcus had first begun to bridge the gap between them. The view before her was a testament to the transformation they had undergone. The once exclusive estate was now alive with community spirit. Children played on the lawn, local artists showcased their work in pop-up galleries, and the air was filled with the sounds of a diverse local band playing on a small stage. Olivia felt a presence beside her and turned to see Amara joining her at the balcony railing. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Amara said, echoing Marcus's words from years ago. Olivia nodded, smiling at the memory. "It's more beautiful than I could have imagined." Amara studied her for a moment. "You know, when Marcus first told me about your plan to change the Foundation, I was skeptical. I've seen too many well-meaning initiatives fizzle out once the initial excitement wears off." "And now?" Olivia asked, curious. Amara's face softened into a warm smile. "Now I see that this wasn't just a passing phase or a PR stunt. You've put in the hard work, day after day, year after year. You've earned my respect, Olivia, and my friendship." Touched by Amara's words, Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." Transformation. 5 years had passed since the night of the gala that had set in motion a series of transformative events for the Hartley Foundation and all those involved. The warm June sun shone down on Evergreen Manor, where a crowd had gathered on the expansive lawn. The occasion was the Foundation's annual Community Day, a far cry from the exclusive black-tie affairs of years past. Olivia Hartley stood at the podium, surveying the diverse group before her. Children played on the grass, families picnicked under shade trees, and community leaders mingled with Foundation staff. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the buzzing energy of possibility. 5 years ago, Olivia began, her voice carrying across the attentive crowd. "We stood at a crossroads. We had to decide whether to continue down a familiar path or to embark on a journey." As the last of the day's attendees began to depart, Olivia gathered with Marcus, Amara, Tasha, and the core team that had been instrumental in the Foundation's transformation. They stood in a circle on the lawn, tired but exhilarated by the day's success. "I propose a toast," Marcus said, raising a glass of champagne, "to how far we've come and to the journey ahead." As they clinked glasses, Olivia looked around at the faces of those who had become more than colleagues. They were partners, confidants, friends. Each of them had been transformed by the work they'd done together, and in turn, they had transformed the Foundation and the community it served. "You know," Tasha said, her eyes bright with excitement, "I've been thinking about the next 5 years. There's so much more we could do." And just like that, they were off, brainstorming new initiatives, discussing ways to expand their impact, debating the best approaches to tackle persistent challenges. Olivia listened, her heart full, marveling at how natural this had become, this collaborative, passionate approach to creating change. As night fell and stars began to twinkle overhead, the group reluctantly began to disperse. Olivia lingered, taking one last walk around the grounds. She paused by the hydrangea bushes where she'd first encountered Marcus, reaching out to touch a soft blue petal. In that moment, she was struck by the profound nature of the transformation she had undergone. The woman who had once been so focused on maintaining the status quo, on living up to a narrow definition of her family's legacy, now found her greatest joy in challenging old systems and building new ones. She thought of her father, wondering what he would think of the foundation's new direction, and for the first time, she realized that it didn't matter. She was proud of the work they were doing, proud of the relationships they had built, proud of the change they were creating in the world. As Olivia walked to her car, she felt a deep sense of contentment, but also of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth and impact. The work of transformation was never truly finished. It was an ongoing process, a commitment to constant learning and evolution. But as she took one last look at Evergreen Manor, aglow with warmth and possibility, Olivia knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey of the past 5 years had changed her, had changed all of them, in ways she never could have imagined. And the beauty of it was, the journey was far from over. There were more stories to be told, more bridges to be built, more transformations to undergo. As Olivia drove home under the starry sky, she felt a surge of excitement for what the future might hold. The Hartley Foundation had been transformed, yes, but more importantly, it had become a catalyst for ongoing transformation in individuals, in communities, in the very fabric of society. And that, Olivia realized, was the most powerful legacy of all. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Olivia's dreams were filled not with the glittering galas of the past, but with visions of a future bright with possibility. A future they were building together, step by step, day by day, transformation by transformation. And in the morning, she would wake ready to continue the work, to keep pushing forward, to keep transforming herself, the foundation, and the world around her. For she had learned that true transformation was not a destination, but a journey. A journey she was now wholeheartedly embracing, with all its challenges and all its joys. The story of the Hartley Foundation's transformation was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And Olivia, along with Marcus, Amara, Tasha, and all those who had joined them on this journey, were ready to write the next chapters together.